October 12th, 2024. Hey, the world hasn't blown itself up yet. Justin Trudeau, of course, spent the week globe-trotting, burning up fossil fuels like he always says he doesn't want you to do, trying to avoid those conservatives and their paralyzing parliament. But he should have been watching out for his own MPs because they've got the knives out. When we come back, a bit. So we are in a very precarious position in this country. We need political change, but we also need the resolve to resist. Yes, so Sasha always demonstrates. Please like this show right now. It really does help us get over that bubble, that bump imposed by YouTube. I could believe it last night, like a show that's 4 days old, they decided was limited monetization because advertisers might not like you suggesting the Trudeau's in trouble. Excuse me? How many stations out there do nothing but advertise Trudeau in trouble and just constantly are about him being berated by protesters and being called names, and I'm being told, I'm being held to account because I say Trudeau is in trouble with his caucus, and he's silenced. That really got them mad. I said he silenced Pierre Poilievre because Poilievre had the audacity to suggest Melanie, Joly, our foreign affairs minister, was somehow playing both sides of the street when it came to the Middle East because of her constituency. She had to get the votes from both sides. And she admitted that. And so then they kicked Poilievre over that. Anyway, I got in trouble over that. I couldn't believe it. So I have challenged it. We'll see what happens. So what's happening with Justin Trudeau? Yes, apparently, when the Toronto Star publishes something, not your usual rabble-rousers. This is Althea Raj, who, of course, is very close to the Liberals. The Toronto Star is always very close to the Liberal Party and to any Liberal Prime Minister. They always endorse Liberal Prime Ministers. In fact, I don't think there's been a single time, I might be wrong, there might be one exception where the Toronto Star did not endorse the Liberal Party and its leader during a federal election. But I'd be very surprised if I was wrong. But something is nagging me saying they did it once anyway. But here's an opinion piece saying that, there's discontent in the ranks. Well, we know. How serious is it? Well, I found this to be even more interesting. The CBC, some Liberal MPs are mounting a new effort to oust Justin Trudeau. Now, I'm going to read briefly from this article because it's quite. Pressure is building on the Prime Minister in his office as a growing number of anxious Liberal MPs are coordinating efforts to force Justin Trudeau to step down as Liberal Party leader. Multiple sources have told the CBC. Disgruntled Liberal MPs held a series of meetings to discuss a path forward for the party since the surprising Toronto St. Paul's by-election loss in June. These talks accelerated with Parliament's return and the Montreal by-election loss. You recall we reported on that one. That was David Lamette's old riding, the former Justice Minister, that went to the block of all things. They escalated further this week with the Prime Minister and his Chief of Staff, Katie Telford, out of the country for a summit in Asia. Yeah, he was in Laos, believe it or not. I was just watching Dr. Strangelove last night, the great Stanley Kubrick black comedy. And I have to confess, that's a movie I could never watch when I was in the military because I thought it was just some left-wing film that was anti-military. And I realize now that it's more about the military-industrial complex and the lunatics who will stop at nothing to have a nuclear war. And they're more powerful today than they were in 1964 when that movie was released, because we're on the verge of a nuclear war with Israel and the surrounding area, the Middle East, and we're on the verge of a nuclear war in Ukraine. It could literally ignite any day if the right set of circumstances happen, just like in June 1914, June 28th, 1914, when the Archduke Ferdinand was assassinated by Serbian terrorists. That was just the right set of circumstances that ignited the First World War, as it was called then, the Great War. Nobody thought there'd be a second one, let alone a third, but we're on the verge of that. But this show is not about that. But I never cease to say we've got to be worried about that possibility, because our political leaders are completely oblivious to the threat of nuclear war right now. They seem to think that when the Cold War ended, about 30 years ago now, that possibility of nuclear war went out the window with it. It's actually a greater threat today. And these idiots like Trudeau and Biden and Kamala Harris, did I say it right? They are bringing us closer to nuclear war than we ever were in the 1960s. Just look at the nuclear clock. You know, this was established by a group of scientists, objective scientists, to gauge how close we were to nuclear war. Now, I think they are objective because they had it pretty close during the Cuban Missile Crisis. They've got it even closer now in 2024, October 2024. It's closer to midnight than it's ever been, because they can see it, because they're not trying to package world affairs in a political wrapping. And that's what Justin Trudeau is doing. So anyway, I'll read a bit more of this, but this is absolutely fascinating. Some MPs are being asked to sign their names to what amounts to a pledge to stand together in calling for Trudeau to resign. Multiple sources. There we go again. The document isn't a letter to be circulated. Sources described it as a vehicle to secure a commitment from MPs to seek a leadership change and to bind the MPs to that goal if the Prime Ministers and his supporters push back. Of course they will. Trudeau has no desire to leave right now. MPs were pulled into meetings across Parliament Hill this week to sign on to the demand for a change at the top. So this is what Trudeau's coming home to. This is what Trudeau is coming back to Canada for. Multiple sources told CBC News that MPs have been signing a single document that is being tightly controlled. No photos or copies of it are being circulated. It's pretty hard in this day and age that somebody's not going to whip out their phone surreptitiously and grab a shot of that. Very easy to do. All the sources, these multiple sources, spoke to CBC News on the condition that they not be named due to the sensitivity of the internal discussions. When you have the knives out, it's very sensitive, yes. These sources said at least 20 MPs have signed the document so far, with others voicing their support for the cause, wondering if they're going to get politically slaughtered in the process or not. One MP who signed the document told CBC News that the number of MPs signing the signature has spilled onto a second page. So they've got 2 pages going here now. So that's about it. I could read the whole article, but you can read it yourself if you are so. If you're interested, I'm sure you are. It's available online, and it is quite interesting. And I think it indicates what I've been saying for the last few months. That Trudeau is very near being turfed by his own caucus. And there's no mechanism, of course. This is something I confirmed again this morning. There's no mechanism in the Liberal Party that Trudeau has to go to a leadership review or has to have a leadership vote. Even if all of his MPs, or even a majority of his MPs, decide it's time to go, he could stay on indefinitely as long as he can withstand the political pressure. And I guess the media will eventually jump on side too. Well, you will see what happens. Before I get to the other issue here about disinformation, and this is, believe me, a clear and present danger. Here's one of the most underreported stories of the week. I did this article for the Post Millennial. It's actually U.S. news, but this is the Toronto Dominion Bank. Yes, TD. It expanded into the U.S. now about, I guess almost a decade ago, maybe more. And of course, it's the 10th largest bank in the United States now, which is quite saying something, because there are a lot of very big banks in the United States. We're talking about banks like JP Morgan and Chase Manhattan. These are huge banks. So TD is the 10th largest, and it was just prosecuted and charged by the U.S. Department of Justice. I couldn't believe this, because I didn't even know about this story. You will see very few outlets in Canada actually reporting this news. It got fined $3 billion for failing to monitor money laundering. And where is the money going? Where is the money in the TD Bank being used for? Fentanyl sales, which are killing Americans in the millions, terrorism, and human trafficking. And we all know how bad the human trafficking is in the United States at the border. 300,000 little children gone, missing, sold into slavery. If I say that word, I'll get in trouble. But sold into slavery of you know what kind. And that's what TD Bank wasn't paying any attention to. There's people on there. Organized crime was using the TD Bank to launder money, and they didn't even notice. Didn't seem to care. So the next time the bank tells you they care about you, about your mortgage, about your family, take that with a grain of salt, because it's clear they really don't give a damn. Now, I want to move on to misinformation here, because one of the best things that could happen, if Justin Trudeau wakes up on Sunday morning and says, hey, this is going to get worse for me unless I do something really drastic here. Now, what's really drastic? Well, he could say I'm resigning. He's not going to do that. Not going to do that right now. And what he could do is prorogue Parliament. Now, a lot of people are saying it's a done deal. It's not. It's not, because Trudeau's cronies, the ones in cabinet closest to him, are all saying not going to happen right now. They're saying that not just publicly, but they're saying that privately. They're saying, no, not going to happen right now. Prorogation is really not where Trudeau's going. It could be as of Sunday, as of tomorrow, as of Monday, it could be where he's going. Things happen that quickly in politics. And I worked on the Hill for 8 years. I saw governments, I saw parliaments prorogued by Stephen Harper when I was there, when I was working on the Hill. And it can happen very quickly. The decision can be made literally over lunch. And then the Prime Minister has to get the endorsement and the approval of the Governor General. That will be no problem for Trudeau with his current Governor General. He'll get it stamped right away if he wants it. The question is, does he want it? And it could be the only way out. But I'm telling you, it might be the best thing for all of us who want some legislation killed. I mentioned this yesterday. I've been mentioning it every time I mention prorogation, because the worst piece of legislation in front of the House of Commons right now is Bill C-63, the Online Harms Act, which the Conservative Party has not only partially embraced, because they say they're going to come out with their own version of it, which is stupidity. We don't need any new versions of Bill C-63. We need it destroyed, annihilated, eviscerated, gone. There is no solution other than that. We don't need Michelle Rempel-Garner to come up with a conservative version, the made-in Tory version of Bill C-60. This is stupidity. Yeah, I'll call Poilievre out for this. I don't know what the hell he's thinking. He said very little about the bill, except it's going to cost a lot of money to have another layer of bureaucracy to enforce it. But that's true. It's going to cost a lot of money. But that's not the worst thing about it. Governments spend money like water anyway. They just continue to print money, and they just will spend money. The real problem here is this bill is about taking your freedom of speech away and making a thought crime possible in Canada. This is a huge step towards dictatorship. And some of the worst bills in the world have been passed without the thought crimes component. And this Attorney General Varani, this idiot who keeps getting on his feet in the House of Commons and saying, this is about protecting children. His bald spot keeps getting larger, if you notice, because of that old Samoan proverb about he who takes away free speech will lose his hair. And that's exactly what's happening to Ronnie. Yes, I might be kidding about that, but it's also happening, isn't it? It's happening. We need to kill this bill. And if Trudeau prorogues Parliament, it will be killed, along with another bill. We've mentioned Bill C-239, which is the bill that will outlaw meat production during pandemics. I'm not kidding. We talked about that about a week ago. That's true. That's coming. That will kill that bill, along with a lot of other foolish bills that might never have a chance to be born anew, because we will have a conservative government. And I cannot see Poilievre actually going through with C-63 if he forms a government and the bill dies. I'm having grave difficulty believing he will repeal the bill, because it's very difficult to repeal bills once they become law, because then you're targeted as, you don't want to protect children from pornography. You don't want to protect women. That's why you're killing this bill. And so they'll have an alternative, or they won't really repeal it. They might amend it. We need it dead in the water. That's the only solution here. So I keep saying that, but it's very... Now listen how every committee that I'm looking at now is talking about misinformation and disinformation. And they're talking about it like everybody thinks this is something we have to stop. It's a motherhood and apple pie issue all of a sudden, except what the hell is it? It's whatever the Liberal government decides it is. Misinformation, disinformation is a very flexible term. It's a dangerous term because the definition is up to those who are making the laws against it. The definition is in the eye of the beholder. So if Justin Trudeau says, hey, that's disinformation because I disagree with it, this disinformation, and it's subject to the law. Let's watch this.
And misinformation. We've heard several definitions of that over the course of our study. I'm kind of old school. I remember when it used to be known as lying.
Now this strikes me as really comical. This is a member of Parliament saying, well, lying should be outlawed. That would put about 85% of the MPs in the slammer, because politics is all about lying, and they do it all the time to us. So what a joke that is.
To be quite frank. But you mentioned in the criminal code, there was no distinction between, or no identification of disinformation or misinformation in the criminal code. What's the equivalent in the criminal code that police agencies would use for the spreading of lies, et cetera? Would it be considered mischief in the criminal code, or what would you use to apply that?
Now, Denis Baudouin, this guy absolutely kills me. He's incapable of coming up with a complete thought in an answer. It's just not incomplete sentences. They're not even complete thoughts.
I'm not sure, misinformation in itself is a criminal offense, Mr. Chair.
Disagreement that you have, or...
Well, at least he's got that right. He seems to recognize that misinformation is not a crime, not yet, but this guy wants to make it a crime.
Difference of opinion. Those
Exactly.
are the definitions you stated earlier and what we've heard in previous testimony.
Yeah, the biggest difference with Bill C-70 is that if a campaign of disinformation with the purpose to affect government processes, it may become criminal. But
what the hell does that mean? If it affects government processes, that makes absolutely no sense. This is what I mean. This guy, okay, he started off fairly well by saying he doesn't think misinformation is a crime yet, Mr. Brassard. But then he says, it could be if it upsets government processes. What the hell?
you won't find these terms under the Security of Information Act. They're not defined in there. So I think it may be something for the committee to, as the member alluded, to see if there's value in defining them. But for police services, we're dealing with harassment, we're dealing with intimidation, threats. So these disinformation, if somebody goes through this, but at some point he crosses the path and there's a threat, then all of a sudden, we investigate the threats, but not necessarily the lying, as you called it, that it used to be called, because oftentimes it may not be a crime.
Country, have you gone back?
Well, that's nice to know it's still not a crime. But of course, that's what Bill C-63 is all about, to make it a crime. And it amazes me how the Conservatives are on the same page as the Liberals with this. They're starting from the premise that misinformation, disinformation is a really bad thing, and we have to outlaw it. And they know damn well who is defining misinformation, disinformation. But they're thinking, oh, it'll be okay when we're the government because we won't do that. Don't trust any government with terms like misinformation and disinformation, because they can mean anything they want. It can mean something on Monday and something quite different on Wednesday. And that's the problem with this. And we need the Conservatives to get off their asses and to have some real vocal opposition to misinformation, disinformation. Now, Michael Barrett, I love this guy. He's a fighter.
Back and reviewed all of your coverage of Mr. Poilievre, or will it be incumbent on Conservatives to have to go through and review historically the disinformation that CTV has perpetrated on Canadians, or is that something that CTV is going to proactively do? Because I can assure you, sir, that going forward, we know that we now need to do this not just for ourselves, but for Canadians, because certainly the trust has been broken.
I want to give Mr. Grayson a chance to answer that, Mr. Barrett. Go ahead.
So thank you. I disagree with the characterization that we are engaged in a campaign of disinformation with respect to Canadians. It's our job to present all sides of public policy issues in a balanced, accurate, and fair way so Canadians can make informed decisions on them. That's what we do consistently on a daily basis. This particular issue that happened on September the 22nd,
sir,
was a very rare and unique occurrence.
Well, I'd be interested to know how you I would be interested to know how you verified that it was rare if you didn't go back and review all of the other instances of coverage.
Yeah. So this is interesting because CTV actually was guilty of disinformation, but when it actually literally tampered with a recording of Pierre Poilievre, that's a good example of real disinformation. Now, should people be going to jail for that? No, they shouldn't be going to jail for that. I mean, we don't need to criminalize speech. We need the discipline, but we don't need to criminalize speech. And I think what happened here, what Poilievre did by exposing CTV, did a hell of a lot more than putting them before some kangaroo court and having them indicted on human rights offenses. But what are these people thinking? What is Justin Trudeau thinking? And what he wants misinformation, disinformation outlawed. Well, it's the same thing that former U.S. Senator, former U.S. Secretary of State, former Democratic presidential candidate, John Kerry. Yeah, the ketchup king. His wife owns Heinz Ketchup. He was Joe Biden's climate czar. This is the guy who globetrots on his private jet, burning up fossil fuels, creating a huge carbon footprint, lands and has the hypocrisy to say, you guys have better start doing different. We better get serious about this climate change stuff. Yeah, he's not serious about anything except lining his pockets.
I think the dislike of and anguish over social media is just growing and growing and growing. And it's part of our problem, particularly in democracies, in terms of building consensus around any issue. It's really hard to govern today. You can't, there's the referees we used to have to determine what's a fact and what isn't a fact are kind of, been eviscerated to a certain degree. And people self-select where they go for their news or for their information. And then you just get into a vicious cycle. So it's really, really hard, much harder to build consensus today than at any time in the 45, 50 years I've been involved in this. And there's a lot of discussion now about how you curb those entities in order to guarantee that you're going to have, some accountability on facts, et cetera. But look, if people go to only one source and the source they go to is sick.
I mean, here's John Kerry and Justin Trudeau is about to say exactly the same thing. Oh, for those days when you didn't have the option of going to social media, when you had to take the word of the three networks, when you only had a couple of national newspapers, when you had your daily newspaper in your city, you had your local newspaper, and there was no variety. Let's go back to those days. Let's put the genie back in the bottle. That's what John Kerry is saying, and that's what Justin Trudeau is about.
And, has an agenda, and they're putting out disinformation. Our First Amendment stands as a major block to the ability to be able to just, hammer it out of existence. So,
you hear that? The First Amendment, which of course is the U.S. guarantee of freedom of speech. John Kerry says, to hell with the First Amendment because it prevents us from stomping out disinformation. It's more important to stomp out disinformation than it is to have free speech. That's how these people think.
What we need is to win the ground, win the right to govern by hopefully having, winning enough votes that you're free to be able to implement change.
That's the big trick and the really, really tricky question right now, because there is out there a deliberate undermining of mainstream media. There are the conspiracy theorists, there are the social media drivers who are trying to do everything they can to keep people in their little filter bubbles, to prevent people from actually agreeing on a common set of facts the way...
You hear that? He wants us all to agree on a common set of facts as decided by Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party. That's the common set of facts he's talking about here.
Yeah, the CBC and CTV, when they were our only sources of news, used to and global used to project across the country at least a common understanding of things. Any government that chooses to step up and say, well, this is the mainstream view, will, if we're not careful, actually compromise those organizations as being mouthpieces for a mainstream view that people on the fringes are exactly. So how do we actually shift that? I think
you hear that. You hear that. This guy says, "Oh, we'd be accused of being bought and paid for." You are bought and paid for. The mainstream media is bought and paid for by the Trudeau government. Can they not even admit that? Trudeau is giving subsidies to those media who want to accept it, who want to be in the pay of the Trudeau government. They can get their money. In some cases, it's not going to journalists. It's going to the executives as more bonuses. But that's the reality. But you heard Trudeau say it. Let's go back to a world of CTV, CBC, and Global and nothing else. So you don't have to have your mind confused by all of these social media outlets, all of these new media, all of these independent media. Don't worry about them. Just watch the news the way it used to be presented. And Justin Trudeau said, I could agree with that. That's the way it should be. So that's what they're thinking. That's what Justin Trudeau is thinking. He wants to go back to these halcyon days, this golden age, pre-internet, pre-social media. Ain't going to happen, folks. But in the meantime, we have to protect ourselves because what Justin Trudeau is trying to do is to annihilate freedom of speech on the internet. He wants to completely eviscerate our freedom of speech on social media, to say what we want. And by the way, buy one of these t-shirts and advertise your right to free speech. I am a Canadian, a free Canadian, free to speak as I please. That's the preamble to the 1962 Bill of Rights, when all Canadians, regardless of their political affiliation, believed in freedom of speech. That was not an outrageous or a controversial comment to make in 1962. It is today because Justin Trudeau doesn't believe you have freedom of speech. He wants you to believe and think and say exactly as he tells you to. And that's where Canada has gone. Thank you for watching today, folks. I really appreciate your support. Let's move this station up. We're doing that every day. Thank you for your kind support. I always say that. And for being there for the station. We'll be back again tomorrow with all the news you need to know and the information that you need to resolve to resist this Trudeau government and authoritarianism in general. God bless you, and I'll see you tomorrow.